Morning. And thank you that you already started contributing here. And so I know a little bit about you. And in order for you to know something about me, actually, I often feel that my journey is best described through the books I wrote. So I don't understand any Swedish. And it seems you were asking about some years or something, your experience, I guess, no? Okay, wow, okay. So it seems to me I'm in this agile world forever almost. So started as a developer with XP in 97. And then moved on to different things. However, then in 2004, I published my first book, which was on scaling agile. So way ahead of the time, nobody was really talking about that and wasn't really interested in that either. And then in 2010, because most of the projects I worked on, which were large, they were also distributed. So in 2010, I published my next book, which was on distributed agile. And also there, nobody really did that. So anyway, I moved on and looked into what does agile really mean in the organizations and what is needed there. And so these are then my next two books. And now I said already too much because I'm not talking about this. I talk about my recent work. And the recent work is this one. In short, it's called Bossa Nova. I will talk a little bit more about what it really is. And Thomas already provided some introduction to it. In order to get started, to know what is probe your organization, what this really means, I want to again ask you here, what do you see as the biggest challenges the companies face? And again, you have already figured out how this is working. So you go to Menti, it's a different code now, and now it's a bit harder because you have to type something in. It's not a multi-choice thing. So you have to come up with something yourself. And yeah, we'll see. I think that's about fine. That's amazing what you're coming up with here. Well, and probably also because it's the theme, the learning is kind of big, or was big. It's changing too quickly. And change is the big topic here as well, which is also true for that slide. So it's hard to really keep focusing on it. Communication is big, and actually kind of everything you're bringing up here goes into the direction that people have summarized as the VUCA world. And VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which means we cannot do the same thing that we did before and keep planning better because there is not so much we can plan for. Things are changing all the time, as you just put out here, that, well, that's not possible anymore. And so we have to keep learning and go with the change. Actually, this VUCA world, in my mind, asks for one, or maybe you can split it up and say these are two things. On the one hand, it asks companies to be agile, and agile in the literal sense. So it asks companies to be responsive, adaptive, flexible, fast, and nimble. And on the other hand, and maybe this is embedded, that's why I said it's one or two things, the thing that's embedded, it also asks companies to become learning organizations. This concept is actually not new. You will come to this just in a second. For the agile organizations, agile companies, again, it's more the literal thing. It's not about using Scrum all over the place. It doesn't make much difference if the board of directors decides to run their meetings through a backlog and appoint someone as a Scrum Master. That doesn't make the company any more agile, really. It might have an effect on the meeting that is perhaps good, but it's not like the huge concept. So I want to look into first what's my understanding of an agile organization. And this is, well, you just heard The Girl from Ipanema, which is actually the bossa nova song, and that's why it fits to the bossa nova here. And what I mean with the bossa nova is that we have to look at companies from very different perspectives, because those different perspectives really support or hinder our learning. Let's start with the budgeting part. So is the budget in your company in a way that, well, if you learn something from the market, your client, your customer, can you make a really strong shift here? For example, start a completely new whole project, cancel one that you are in, or investing more than you thought before, or is the money already in the different buckets because that has been decided a year before, because the budgets are calendar year wise? As long as it's like that, it's hard to really comprehend the learning that we are getting and make a change according to that learning, because that these budgets might hinder that already. Then looking at the open space down there, also, is it in your company that you come up with job descriptions and then people apply for a specific job and they're hired for that job, and it's kind of, people are put in that box, this is what they ought to do? Or is it that you reach out and use the full potential, the innovative power of every individual, invite everyone to be innovative and keep learning all the time? So that's what's really needed in order to, survive and thrive in that VUCA world, really. Then looking at the top sociocracy, there it's more the idea, well, is the power centralized? Are decisions made in a centralized way, or are they decentralized? And is every voice heard? Because if we hear every voice, if we listen to everyone, we can also take in the different learnings and different perspectives from all the different people we have in the company. And this is what sociocracy does. And well, Agile, I guess you all know about this. So Agile is really more about taking the feedback on the product, on our development all the time, and incorporating that feedback by learning and making the next step here. So this is essential. So all of those four streams exist for a long time, but they provide a different perspective on the organization and help organizations to actually learn. Now coming to the learning organization, I said already this is pretty old. So this quote is from the 90s. So it's not really new, but it's still valid. It's still very true. So Peter Senge, they defined learning organizations that they do encourage adaptive and generative learning, encourage their employees to think outside the box. Wow. That speaks as well a bit like open space here too. To work in conjunction with other employees to find the best answer to any problem. And again, I still think that's very true, although it's from the 90s. And I would like to look now into how can this be implemented? What do companies actually do who see this as their way of working? And I start with one example. This is an example of a client of mine, an ERP producer, not the big German one. I don't know if I said that I'm from Germany, but it's not the big German one. It's actually a mid-sized company in Switzerland. And they had that time where they decided to restructure the way they are working. And they had about 110, 120 people there. And because of their transformation to Agile, they thought maybe we should also then have those cross-functional teams so they can self-organize and all of that. And for doing so, what we came up with there was, well, we just put out here on flip charts in the auditorium where people walk by very often, what are the different features or product areas that the ERP system is clustering, and what kind of people are we looking for here? And then we had this hanging out there for 2 weeks, and people signed up and shuffled around, and then at the end it looked more a bit like this. It's still not the end, but you see it in solid markers written in. People wrote down their names, whereas before it was more stickies because they wanted to be more flexible and talk to each other, which team they really want to work on. The surprising thing for me was at the time, so this was really the first time I did this afterwards, and it's, I don't know, that's probably 12, 15 years ago. Afterwards I did it many more times, but at the time I really thought, I'm not sure if this will work out. Probably there are areas, I don't know, is there anyone interested to work on purchase? Maybe this is completely boring and nobody wants to sign up and everyone goes to a different feature of the product? Or is it that we will end up with a few really great teams and some laggard teams because people don't look for seniority and experience and so on? This all didn't happen, and it never happened, even afterwards not. And just in case you wonder also, because they said this here, I have to say that, I've also done this many times in a distributed setting, and there we just do it very simple. We put it on the wiki, on the Confluence page, and people sign up there. We have these different areas for the products, and it's just working the same way. Very easy. So this is one example. I come up with another example. Who knows that kind of thing? Who likes that? So many hands here. Nobody likes that. The problem with these travel expenses and all the procedures, we have often procedures and rules around travel expenses, is that it's kind of sending the wrong signal. So the signal is that on the one hand, we trust you to run $1 million, I don't know, let's put dollar project or euro, but we don't trust you to book a decent hotel. What is that? You know, it's kind of a weird message that we are sending to everyone. So we have a lot of rules and regulations in place for kind of, showing how we mistrust everyone. And it can be done in a different way. So here's the example. It's an example from a German company. The company is called IT Agile. And they also figured, well, this is not really working, and they have already Agile in the name, and it seems like it didn't really fit together their other beliefs in how they are working. And so they came up with exactly 3 rules or principles for all their travel expenses. And the first principle was, well, whenever you travel and you book something and you kind of spend money, company money, first thing is, it has to be legal. That's good, I thought, when I heard that. That's important. The second principle is, whenever you spend the money on your travels, it has to be sensitive. However, nobody defined what that means. So it's just open and whatever that is. And the third principle is, you have to take care of yourself. It's also not defined what that means. It's probably different for everyone. So for me, it probably would mean, because I'm tour a lot, like I don't want to have too many connections also because I fear I will never end up in the place I want to go to. But that might be different for different people. And I just recently talked to the CEO of IT Agile, and I asked, so how is it going now? Because I think they started it maybe like 3 years ago to change that. And he said they also collected some data. And what they found was that about a third is always traveling first class. Actually, they're operating in Germany only, I believe. And therefore, that's kind of our high-speed train, the ICE. And so they're traveling with trains typically. And 2/3 of the people traveling second class. We don't have any other classes. And then he said, well, and not that you think it's people like me as a CEO or the other kind of CXOs here traveling first class. It's the consultants traveling first class. And he also said, everyone is fine with that, because they are traveling so much, and therefore caring for themselves is something different than for people who traveling just occasionally. So it's all fine. So people spend different amounts of money even if they go to the same place, and it's all okay for them. Actually, there's another example from a different company, and I'm sorry, I forgot the name of that company. They came up with one principle only. And the principle is not only to travel expenses, but to all expenses. Whenever you spend money, you have to put it on the intranet. So on the intranet, you say like, I spend that much for this and that. And then, well, I haven't been there, but I guess then peer pressure is happening. You know, if I bought something really expensive, probably I need to explain to some of my peers. So maybe I have a good explanation. Maybe it's absolutely a good idea that I spent that much money, right? But who knows? I think I have another example. Do I? Yes. Another company, also, sorry, it's also a German one. It's probably because I'm based in Germany. There the staff said, well, the way we decide, or not we, the way it's decided on bonuses and salary increases doesn't sound very agile. And we feel like that's not transparent, and we don't know what's really going on there, who's getting a bonus and who doesn't, and so on. And we want to do something about that. So a group of people got together, so not many, just a few. They got together and they said, well, what about if we are making our salaries at the first step transparent to each other? So there was this group of 10 people, and they just published their salaries amongst each other. And I believe this is different in Sweden than in Germany, but in Germany this is big. We don't talk about this, so that's a kind of a no-go. And then they found that, well, that's interesting, and they learned from each other and so on, and then they decided, well, what about if we just make it public to everyone in the company? So they did. And surprisingly, what happened, or maybe not so surprisingly, everyone else started to do that. So all of a sudden, this was something they could talk about. And then over that, because people were kind of, oh, this is different. It's kind of an open, honest communication that we are starting here. They came up with a very defined process, how they decide on bonuses. So just try to kind of summarize what they do is, well, first of all, they have somebody elected who is kind of the salary representative. They also, before they get started, it's the top management deciding on like how much money do we actually have in our buckets to distribute here so that we know what is the money here. And then, oh, and maybe I should go over there. And then that's Mayflower, it's the company's name. And then the next thing is that every person who might get a salary increase brings 2 other people to kind of a meeting where people discuss about that. And the last thing as kind of input to it is that the management says that's kind of what's important for the company. What are the things they really think is important and they want to see from everyone that they do this. And then they talk about this, and I talk about this in a way like, how is this person contributing to this thing that we want to see? Is the person perhaps even helping or inspiring others to contribute to that? Are they supporting each other? So it's really the characteristics they're asking for are a lot about learning, collaboration, also making things transparent and so on. And then they decide together what should be the bonus that person should get. And that's what they do, like in their rounds with all the people. And at the end, they do the math. And if it's more than their bucket offers, they just do, in relation to each other, they calculate it down so that it's working. or also upwards. That's possible too. So that's their way of coming up with an idea. What could be a different process to decide on stuff like that? And well, often I feel money makes a whole difference. Often it stops when people, I don't know. The client I'm working with right now, I just learned that recently and I should have been paying more attention to it. But there, it's really so hard for the team to, well, be open to learn something else. You know, the T-shaped people that we talk about in Agile, that you're not only knowing like one field, but a few more and so on. And they are not really open to do that. And I just learned, I think like 1-2 weeks ago, well, they have this career path and that bonus that's attached to how well are you an expert in your one field, and there is no reward if you learn something else. And the whole technical ladder is only focusing around this one expertise you are having. Well, no wonder that's not working, right? So money does a lot that we sometimes are not sure about. Anyway, so these were a few examples, but companies did what they tried, and then they kept learning and they changed it again. And I want to look now into what are the underlying values for those companies. And the values that we found and saw were those 4. So on the one hand, transparency is very high. Well, you saw it already, like the self-selection of the teams. That's all open. What do we need to work on? Of course, also the salary decision here. Then it's a lot about self-organization. That's also true for all 3 examples. It's about continuous learning because we want to learn together also around these things. How do they support us? How can we make a better step? And it was all aligned to the customer. It's probably not so apparent for all of those examples, maybe the most for the self-selecting teams, because there it was around what kind of products do we actually offer and what makes sense, how to structure the teams here. And I also have a definition for that, so you can take a look, and I give you a minute or so to read it. And I want to point out one of those fields because it's the thing that's often questioned the most. Well, maybe it depends, as everything. So transparency is often the thing that's questioned a lot because on the one hand, people feel like, whoa, but we can't make everything transparent. Well, nobody asks for that. I think it's not a good idea even to make everything transparent. But what's really important is that the people who need some information have a possibility to get that information. And that information is not a power instrument anymore, but it's something that helps us to get the data, again, in order to learn and then get better. So that's the important thing. That's why it's about lowering the barriers here for if you need the information. Okay, so far about the values. Now, I would like to know from you, so again, I have a question to you, is what do you think, where is a good place to start if you want to start a change like that? Do you start with strategy, changing your strategy of the company, and then you believe like, well, structure will probably follow afterwards and then process? Or do you start changing your structure? Maybe that's kind of the self-selecting teams, and then the process will follow, and then the strategy. Or do you start changing the process, and then the other stuff will follow, hopefully? Or maybe none of the above, or maybe all of that. So again, if you go to Menti, somewhat all of the above. I'm not sure if somebody said a trend at the beginning. And by the way, this was, what I just played was cool jazz, and so for your whatever. Otherwise, education, bossa nova is a fusion of cool jazz and samba. So we now had the cool jazz here as well. Okay, somewhat all of the above is what most of the people believe, and that's kind of true, and therefore all the ones on the top are as well true. And maybe you could also say, and therefore none is true. For really a long time, everyone thought that we have to first start with actually the structure, and then the strategy will follow. And that's also where there's a lot of research out, probably the most out of there. So if you search for strategy follows structure, you find a lot of hits. And if you but nowadays, if you search the other way around, like structure follows strategy, you also get a lot of hits. The thing is that over time, people have found out that those three things are all related. They all have an influence into what are we doing in a corporation, and they also, wherever you start, something else will follow along, will follow through. And I think this is really good news, because if you want to start working on a learning organization and make a difference, it doesn't matter where you start. You can start anywhere, because other stuff will follow along. So that's the good news here. Maybe for another thing, and in case you wonder what's inside the triangle, it's kind of that definition that companies are really characterized by these three things. And that's also how we sometimes talk about companies. Like we say, well, it is an organization, really. And what we often have in mind here is kind of what is the purpose of the thing. So what is it that makes it an organization? Then if we talk about structure, we say like the company has a structure. This is more where we think of maybe the hierarchy or anything. And then for the process, it's kind of how we organize ourselves in the company. So these are kind of these three different angles how we look at companies. Now, very often I get then kind of the question mark, why is there nowhere a culture? Because we often talk about corporate culture and how culture supports or hinders what we are doing, and it might support or hinder our agile transformation or not. And the thing is, culture emerges from what we are doing in these three areas. So it's, if you will, culture sits in the middle of the triangle, and it's an emergent thing. So it's really not so much that we can start and say, okay, now let's change our culture. What we can do is we change our behaviors or habits in terms of the strategy, the processes, or the structure. And once these have changed, a different culture emerges. And this is also the examples that I gave before from these different companies, what they have tried and then learned about and then changed again, that really implemented a different culture. And maybe you have that already in your mind, what kind of all could happen once the staff decides on who gets what kind of bonus or salary increase, or if all developers decide what they want to work on, that they can follow their passion. This triggers a lot of other stuff. It's not only that little thing, that structure is then different, it's way more than that. Okay, so this is kind of where do you start? And then the question is, how? And the how is, well, maybe it's really not so different from what we do in Agile, I think. So the how is, we look at our situation where we are in, and we find out, like, what is the problem we need to address? What's the problem we need to tackle here? And then we look at, we call these probes, we look at what have, for example, other companies done. And maybe this is an experiment we do around that probe. Maybe you start in a small area just to use this self-selected team thing. Maybe you do something completely different. And then you look again up at in which situation are you in now? What has changed? Is it for the better or maybe not? Maybe it was not a good idea to do that. Maybe it didn't fit your own space. Maybe you need to do something else. And what would be really good, I wouldn't be able to share this. Well, some of that I would be able to share because I was part of it, but some not. But if people wouldn't have published about that, well, wouldn't be able to learn from others. And just for me to point out to like this thing, how Mayflower changed their decisions on bonuses on salary increases, that's written up in a blog article on our website. So agilebossanova.org, and there are blogs, and there you find the complete write-up, what they did and what kind of process they went through till they ended up where, well, which is the state that I know. Probably it has changed already again. Okay, so this is this. And then the question maybe still is, what is a probe? Let's look at that. Let's look at this one. It's actually one of my favorites anyway. Is trust cheaper? And is trust cheaper is the probe of IT Agile, the travel expenses thing. So it comes with a background definition, which is kind of our result of the reflection of the situation. What is the situation we are in? Well, we see that, well, I asked you already, nobody liked those travel expense procedures and how to fill it in and adhere to all the rules and so on. So this is kind of what we see. That's our situation. Then we come up with a hypothesis. What is it we think would happen if we would do this differently? So that's our hypothesis. And then for the experiment, that's really short here, because you have seen the real experiment already. I explained it to you. So first of all, you measure if this is true what you really see. So you do a pre-measurement. Is it really that people are frustrated? And I kind of did this measurement by asking you to raise your hands. And nobody was excited about the travel expense procedures here. Then you try for a given time frame, so one suggestion could be 3 months, maybe it's shorter, maybe it's longer. And then you do a post-survey, and maybe what you're trying is the thing that IT Agile does with the 3 principles, or maybe what that other company does with just the 1 principle, or maybe you come up with something completely different. And then you post-measure. Does it really make a change? Does it differ to what you've seen before? And is your hypothesis validated, or is it maybe invalidated? Maybe you were completely wrong at the beginning, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine, because the focus is on the learning. It is on what do we learn by going through these kinds of probes? Or what do we learn from one experiment and the next? And so if the hypothesis is invalidated, it just means we learned something. So it's not about failing here, or you could also say it in a different way, like it's kind of about not failing fast, but learning fast, or about a safe-to-fail experiment, because there is no such thing as a failure here. And maybe one other note here, because sometimes that's tricky too. So, yeah, here we say it's for a few units. And for a few units, that might mean that not everyone wants to be part of it. And that's also fine. This is also kind of a safe experiment. So no punishment, neither if you want to be part of such a probe or not. So that has to be really obvious up front. Otherwise, it will not work. And, yeah, let's go through that. So I don't want to go into detail through that, but this is the probe that Mayflower did. So that was the thing about the bonus increase. So there's this background definition that, well, there are some hierarchies always in place, even if it's kind of egalitarian, and the hierarchy can be of different nature. It can be of seniority, different skills, or maybe even, also like how long am I in the company, or sometimes it's natural leadership or anything. So it can be also something like that. And then the question is, well, if we make those peer decisions, maybe it all gets more transparent and we can follow through that better than we often can if somebody gets something and we don't know really why. So, and then you can start doing kind of an experiment here. And I said already, the example, even with the different steps that my flower did here. Now I want to look into something different. It's also an example, actually. It's an example from a bank, and I haven't been involved in that, and therefore this is Jutta's imagination of how the room for the board of directors in that bank looked like. Very heavy oak table and heavy chairs and so on. Probably it looks completely different for that bank. However, the board of directors in this case decided to start an experiment. And the experiment was what would happen, or rather put it as a hypothesis, would the communication improve if we would remove the table from the boardroom? And we have our meetings in that room, but without the table. And they did. And what they found out was that the communication was way more open and honest. And what was even more interesting, which they haven't thought of, what they haven't thought of was also the communication from the board to the rest of the company was way better because it was more open, honest, more give and take and interaction between what's going on the board and what's going on in the company. Now, you might wonder, why am I telling you that? I saw before that, 40% or what are developers here. So I'm not assuming that you're all sitting on the board of directors here and in the boardroom and you are the ones now putting away that table and now everything is happily ever after, right? I don't think so. I thought about sharing this example because the change they did, the experiment they did, is a very tiny one. It's not costly. It's kind of nothing really. It's putting that table away. And it made a huge difference. So my point here is, in your situation you are in, where you can make a difference, often the changes, they can be very, very small. And a really huge amount of learning follows through that. And that's the key thing here. So I don't expect you that you're walking now to your CXOs and your board of directors and tell them, you have to remove that table. That's not my point. It's really, well, we learned we can start anywhere, and also anyone can get started with something small, and the small can get bigger. And now I wonder, that's after that. So what this example actually is something that we see more and more because the learning organization is the thing that's really, what's really needing to happen. So what's different from what you saw before? It's really people come up with more and more probes. It's not anymore so much that they look at, well, which company has done that, and if I'm working at a bank, I might look at what that other bank has done, and if I hear a story from a probe from mechanical engineering, I don't trust them because they're different. They're too different for me. It's kind of, on the one hand, learning from what other companies are trying, but also, even more so, coming up with your own probes, your own experiments, your own trials, your own hypothesis, because it's in your context. It's your current situation you are in here. And that's, I believe, kind of the core of, on the one hand, an agile organization, but also the core of a learning organization. To keep reflecting where you're at, What's your hypothesis if any kind of change would happen? And then try it. Learn from it and talk about it. So others can learn from you too. So the learning should be shared as well. And now probably because I'm in Sweden, I have to bring this. Sometimes we feel, well, I'm just little Jutta. I can't make a difference here. It's just I'm in this position, and how can I make a difference? And I said already, I'm in Sweden. So there's this little girl. She doesn't have any position, right? There's nobody who put her in charge and said, let's go make a difference. And, well, probably there's a lot of whatever. It was just the right timing, right place, and all of that is often coming together. We know of stories from other also young people who tried that maybe 20 years ago and nobody listened. And now people listen, maybe also the way it is and social media and all of that. So, of course, stuff is coming together. But again, the point is you don't need to be in the power or in charge in order to make it different at your place where you are. And you can start that learning cycle in your company, just by yourself, as she's done. We don't know where it's going, but it's going somewhere, definitely. And I come to the end, which is, first of all, another Peter Senge quote. So a learning organization is a group of people who are continually enhancing their capabilities to create what they want to create. So a learning organization relies on or depends upon every individual in the organization. Otherwise, there's no learning. So if we are not starting, it will not happen. And I believe, yeah, okay, so this is a little overview as a reminder what you've seen. So different values. Then you can start anywhere. This is how you start, by reflecting and then trying. And I would like, again, to hear from you. What's kind of your most important or surprising concept that you learned in this keynote? So I think you summarized that very well. And so I want to come with my closing slide, and I see something is missing here. So first of all, thank you very much. I brought a few copies of my book here, not many, but if you're interested, just see me. And we have, that's what's missing at the top here, we have a LinkedIn group. So if you're interested in learning more about this, and of course I will share the slides, and so you can get everything from that. So, and there's just one more song I really need to play. So, thank you so much and enjoy the conference.